This screencast is going to explain energy flow within a food chain. This right here is our food chain. The first thing that we need to do is label the organisms. So in this case, the carrots are our producers. And remember that we also call producers autotrophs. The rabbit is our herbivore. The fox, our carnivore. And although the lion is also a carnivore, we also call them top carnivores. Herbivore, carnivore, and top carnivore are also called consumers, as well as heterotrophs. Now that we have our food chain labeled, we want to draw the arrows correctly in order to represent who eats who. So in this case, the arrow gets drawn into the mouth of the organism that eats it. So for the carrots, they are going to go into the rabbit's mouth since the rabbit is eating the carrots. Therefore, in this case, the arrow is going from left to right. The rabbit is going into the fox's mouth, and then the fox is going into the lion's mouth. Now that we have our food chain drawn correctly, we are going to be labeling our trophic levels. Trophic levels start from the producer and go up to the top carnivore. Therefore, our carrots are going to be our first level. The rabbit is our second level. The fox is our third level. And the lion is our fourth level. Now that our trophic levels are done, we're going to take a look at the energy. So in terms of energy, when the energy is passed on, only 10% is passed. This is extremely important. The rest of the energy gets lost as heat. So if we say that the carrots start out with 1,000 kilocalories of energy, the rabbit is only going to get 10% of the 1,000. So 10% of 1,000 is 100. So once the rabbit eats the carrots, they are given 100 kilocalories of energy. Like I said before, the rest is lost as heat. When the fox eats the rabbit, it is only going to get 10% of 100. So the fox is only going to get 10 kilocalories of energy. When the lion eats the fox, the lion is going to be left with 1 kilocalorie of energy. What is important to remember is that as energy goes down in the food chain, it is going to decrease since only 10% is being passed on. This screencast showed us energy flow within a food chain, as well as how to label a food chain. Now that we took a look at energy flow within a food chain, we're going to look at energy flow within an energy pyramid. Energy pyramids are simple to read. If you notice, the producers are at the bottom, and then come herbivores, carnivores, secondary carnivores, and apex predators. Apex predators is just a fancy name for top carnivores, which is what we use in this class. An energy pyramid can also look like a food chain. The beginning of the food chain is at the bottom, and then the end of the food chain is at the top. Remember, there are also other names for the organisms within the energy pyramid or in a food chain. At the bottom we have our producers. We also call them autotrophs. Remember that all the consumers afterwards can be called consumers, they can be called heterotrophs, and they can also be labeled as primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. I am going to label those for you now, so that you know that those are another name for them. You will see these terms used on your exam and on quizzes that you take in class. Now that we know some other names for levels within the energy pyramid, we're going to actually take a look at the energy. Remember before you learned that 10% of the energy is passed on. The rest is lost as heat. In this energy pyramid, if our producers start out with 90,000 kilocalories of energy, only 10% of that 90,000 is going to be passed on to the next level, which is the primary consumer, or the herbivores in this case. Since 10% of 90,000 is 9,000, only 9,000 kilocalories of energy will be passed on. Next, when you go from the primary consumer to the secondary consumer, only 10% will be passed on. In this case, only 900 kilocalories of energy. As you move up the energy pyramid, the energy gets less as less, because remember we talked about how 10% is passed on and the rest is lost as heat. So, from the carnivores to the secondary carnivores, only 90 kilocalories of energy are passed on. Then when you go from the secondary carnivores to the top carnivores, you're left with 9 kilocalories of energy. This video has showed you energy flow within a food chain, as well as energy flow within an energy pyramid. It also tells you some other terms to label a food chain and energy pyramid.